because we do this all the time. Senator Feinstein.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. As I understand this, today is the second hearing in the chairman's examination of Crossfire Hurricane. That's the FBI's investigation into Russian election interference and ties to the Trump campaign. Inspector General Horowitz confirmed after a 19-month investigation, the FBI had a legitimate basis to investigate whether the Trump campaign was involved in Russia's efforts to interfere in the 2016 election. Specifically, in late July 2016, Australian officials informed the FBI that Trump campaign advisor George Papadopoulos had advanced knowledge that Russia was willing to, quote, assist the Trump campaign, end quote, by anonymously releasing dirt on Clinton in the form of thousands of emails. The FBI learned this 1 week after WikiLeaks had released 20,000 emails that Russia had hacked from the computers of the Democratic National Committee. Given the circumstances, it was essential that the FBI investigate. Today's witness, former Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates, has said Russia's attack on our election required both an investigation and a response. And as Inspector General Horowitz confirmed, the opening of the investigation had nothing to do with reporting from Christopher Steele, the so-called Steele dossier. That counterintelligence investigation, Crossfire Hurricane, eventually became the Mueller investigation. And former Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein recently confirmed to this committee that the Steele dossier had nothing to do with the Mueller investigation either. Mueller's investigation detailed sweeping and systematic Russian interference in the 2016 election. The special counsel determined that the Russian government, quote, perceived it would benefit from a Trump presidency and worked to secure that outcome, end quote. The Mueller investigation uncovered more than 120 contacts between the Trump campaign and individuals linked to Russia, revealing that the Trump campaign knew about, welcomed, and expected it would benefit electorally from Russia's interference. The investigation also established that individuals associated with the Trump campaign repeatedly lied to Congress, the special counsel, and the American people to conceal their contacts with Russia. We also disagree with President Trump and his allies' claims about Michael Flynn, namely that Obama officials, including Vice President Biden, unfairly targeted Flynn in order to undermine Trump's presidency. And the facts are well known and not in dispute, but let me review them. In late December 2016, President Obama imposed sanctions to punish Russia for its unprecedented attack on our democracy. That same day, Flynn spoke several times with Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak. Transcripts of the calls reveal that Flynn urged Russia not to escalate matters, but to respond to U.S. sanctions in a, quote, reciprocal, end quote, or, quote, even-keeled, end quote, manner. Flynn did not express disapproval for Russia's interference in the election. Instead, he sent a clear message that the incoming administration was not interested in holding Russia accountable, a message that undermined U.S. policy. When Flynn was interviewed about his conversations with Kislyak as part of Crossfire Hurricane, he did not tell the truth. He was charged by Special Counsel Mueller and pleaded guilty twice to lying to the FBI. He stated in court under oath that his actions were wrong and that he accepted full responsibility for them. Despite Flynn's guilty pleas, this May, Attorney General Barr intervened to dismiss the case over the objection of career prosecutors. Flynn was not treated unfairly. In fact, it appears that he was granted favorable treatment by having the Justice Department seek to dismiss his case even after he admitted guilt and took responsibility for his actions. I believe this sends the wrong message. It signals that it is acceptable to lie to the FBI, and it raises legitimate questions about whether an ally of the president received special treatment. Given her involvement in the early stages of Mr. Flynn's case, I hope that our witness today, former Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates, can shed additional light on why the Flynn investigation and charges were warranted. Let me just say this. The real question isn't whether the Logan Act was violated. The question is whether Flynn was acting on his own without the president-elect's knowledge or permission. If so, that was a counterintelligence problem. If, however, the incoming president did know that Flynn was talking to Kislyak, asking Russia not to overreact to U.S. sanctions, and suggesting that the incoming administration would not hold Russia accountable, then why was the incoming president not interested in holding Russia accountable for interfering in the 2016 election? I hope that we will use the investigation's findings to harden our defenses, including addressing Russia's attempts to interfere in the 2020 election and the president's unwillingness to denounce foreign interference. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Feinstein. Ms. Yates is appearing here voluntarily, and I appreciate that. She had some reasons she couldn't be here in person, which I think have been accommodated and were legitimate. And we've agreed to the following, that she will answer questions within the following scope: knowledge of the events described in the DOJ OIG report entitled Review of 4 FISA Applications and Other Aspects of FBI Crossfire Hurricane Investigation, knowledge of the Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election, Ms. Yates' knowledge of the investigation of General Flynn, and we'll try to honor that. I appreciate her doing this voluntarily. With that understanding, I'd like now swear Ms. Yates in. I can't see you. You out there somewhere?
I think we need to see her, Mr.
Yeah, I think we do too.
I think it may be that I have to speak for it to turn.
Yeah, we see you. All right. Could you raise your right hand, please? Do you solemnly swear or affirm that testimony you're about to get this committee is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but truth, so help you God? Thank you. You may make your opening statement, Ms. Yates.
Thank you, Chairman Graham, Ranking Member Feinstein, and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify here today. Now, as some of you know, I was a career prosecutor at the Department of Justice. I was honored to represent the people of the United States for over 27 years through 5 Democratic and Republican administrations. And I took very seriously my responsibility to represent the people in a manner that engendered the trust of the public I served. As you know, I've testified a number of times about the general topics of today's hearing, but as Chairman Graham just indicated, he is particularly interested in one specific subject, that being a meeting that occurred in the Oval Office on January 5th of 2017. So why don't I just go directly to that?
She could speak more loudly.
I'm sorry, I'm hearing.
Could you speak up just a bit, a little louder, please?
Sure, I'll try. I've never been accused of being too soft-spoken, but I'll try to be louder, yes. Chairman Graham, you have indicated that you are particularly interested in the meeting that occurred in the Oval Office on January 5th, 2017. And can you all hear me okay now?
Much better.
Great. So why don't I just go directly to that? This meeting took place just 2 months after the 2016 election. And this was at a time when we were just beginning to come to terms with a foreign adversary's stunning, systematic attack on our democracy. You know, we've all heard Russian interference in our election so much that it's kind of lost its shock value. But this attack on our homeland was indeed shocking. By late December, our intelligence community had determined that Russia, acting on the direct orders of President Vladimir Putin, had engaged in a massive effort to undermine faith in our democratic processes, to hurt Hillary Clinton's chance of electability, and to aid the candidacy of now President Donald Trump. The Russian government had used cyber attacks, the strategic release of stolen information, and a coordinated campaign to weaponize social media against American citizens. This unprecedented act of aggression could not go unanswered. So on December 28th, the Obama administration took a first step by ejecting 35 suspected Russian intelligence operatives and imposing other sanctions on Russia. They did this both to punish the Russians for their attack on our democracy and, importantly, to deter them from ever doing it again. As expected, the Russians immediately announced that they would retaliate. But then the next day, they inexplicably reversed course and announced that they didn't intend to take any responsive action. The administration was understandably perplexed by this abrupt change, and President Obama asked the intel community to try to figure out what had happened. And the FBI discovered the answer. General Michael Flynn, the incoming National Security Advisor, was having back-channel discussions with Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak. Recorded conversations between General Flynn and the ambassador revealed that General Flynn had essentially neutered the U.S. government's message of deterrence. Far from rebuking the Russians for their attack on our country, General Flynn was conciliatory. He tried to persuade the Russians not to escalate the situation so they could reset the relationship. The day after General Flynn's call with Kislyak, Putin himself announced that the Russians wouldn't take any action whatsoever to respond to America's sanctions. And President Trump tweeted praise of Putin's decision. In a follow-up call between Kislyak and Flynn, Kislyak advised Flynn that Moscow had made this decision, had made this course reversal as a direct result of Flynn's request. So that's what was happening in the days that led up to this January 5th meeting. On that day, the White House had the intel chiefs in to brief the president and the vice president and the national security advisor on their intelligence assessment of Russian interference. Portions of that assessment were due to be released publicly the next day. Attorney General Lynch was out of town, so I was asked to stand in her place. Following the briefing, which took place in the Oval Office, the president asked Director Comey and me to stay back with the vice president and the national security advisor. I recall that the president began the after meeting by saying something to the effect that he had learned of the calls between Kislyak and Flynn, and he didn't want to know anything anymore, and he didn't want to influence anything. But what he did want to know was whether the White House could continue to share sensitive national security information with General Flynn during the transition. Now, at this point, I didn't know why the president was asking this question, because this was the first I had heard of the calls between Flynn and Kislyak. I was really surprised both that General Flynn had engaged in these discussions and that Director Comey knew about them, but I didn't. And so after we left the Oval Office, Director Comey and I talked in the waiting room that's there outside the Oval Office. And I was frankly irritated with Director Comey for not having told me about the calls. And I asked him why this was the first that I was hearing of this. And he told me that his team had briefed the lawyers in the National Security Division about the calls the previous day, and he expected that the NSD lawyers would brief me. As it turned out, the National Security Division lawyers had, in fact, made an appointment already that was scheduled with me for that afternoon. Now, while I don't recall all the details of the conversation in the Oval Office, my memory is clear on the important points. The purpose of this meeting was for the president to find out whether, based on the calls between Ambassador Kislyak and General Flynn, the transition team needed to be careful about what it was sharing with General Flynn. During the meeting, the president, the vice president, and the national security advisor did not in any way attempt to direct or influence any kind of investigation. Something like that would have set off alarms for me, and it would have stuck out both at the time and in my memory. No such thing happened. The president was focused entirely on the national security implications of sharing sensitive intelligence information with General Flynn during the transition, a process that was obviously already underway at the White House. I will close with this. In this election year, I hope that we won't lose sight of the very real threat posed by the ongoing efforts of a foreign adversary to undermine our democratic processes, and that we will continue to proactively protect the integrity of our elections. I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You mentioned shock value, that is shocking what the Russians did. I agree, we need to stop it. Did you read the Horowitz report, Ms. Yates?
I did.
Were you shocked by it?
I certainly was shocked, yes. I think that the conduct that was reflected there.
So let's talk about that conduct right quick. We're talking about using a document that came from a Russian subsource to get a warrant against an American citizen repeatedly that was full of garbage. Does that bother you?
Well, I'm not sure that I agree.
Does it bother you that the FISA court rebuked the Department of Justice and the FBI regarding the Carter Page warrant application?
Senator, I believe that the Department of Justice and the FBI have a duty of candor with the FISA court that was not.
Do you believe they fulfilled that duty?
No, I do not believe that they did. I think that there were.
As a matter of fact, you signed that warrant application in October and January. Is that correct?
That's right.
Knowing then what you know now, would you sign that application?
Senator, I would never sign any document.
So I take that to be no, because that document was a fraud. Is that a fair statement? If you knew then what you know now, you wouldn't have signed it?
I wouldn't sign anything that I knew to contain errors or omissions.
Well, did that contain errors and omissions?
Yeah, and I would never knowingly sign a document. Yeah. I didn't do that in the 27 years I was.
I believe you didn't know. I believe you didn't know that what you signed was wrong. The question is, if you had known, you wouldn't have signed it. Is that correct?
No, if I had known that it contained incorrect information, I certainly wouldn't have signed it.
Thank you. And do you agree with me it did contain incorrect information?
I know that now based on the Horowitz report.
That's all I'm trying to say. I'm not saying that you lied to the court. I'm saying you signed something that was a lie and you didn't know it. Now let's talk about a January 5th meeting. Was the vice president there?
Yes, he was.
Okay. Did he mention the Logan Act?
You know, I don't remember the vice president saying much of anything in this meeting.
So you don't remember him mentioning the Logan Act?
No, I don't.
Did anybody mention the Logan Act?
I have a vague memory of Director Comey mentioning the Logan Act.
Okay, what was he mentioning the Logan Act about? In what context?
Well, I'm not sure if he mentioned that in the Oval Office meeting or in the meeting that he
What do
and
you
I
think
had.
about the?
Mr. Chairman, let her answer the question. Just because it's a woman testifying doesn't mean she has to be cut
Yeah,
off. like
thanks
every
a
answer.
lot, Senator Lee. I really appreciate that. You're very constructive. So here's my question. Was the Logan Act mentioned in the meeting?
I recall Director Comey mentioning it at some point. What I'm not sure about, Senator Graham, and I want to be
That's
absolutely
fair.
certain.
That's fair. You don't know if it's mentioned in the meeting or not. Do you believe
No, I do recall Director Comey mentioning it at some point. I'm not sure if it
Right.
was in the
No, I
meeting
got you. I got
or in
you.
the discussion he and I had.
No, I got
That's
you.
all I'm trying to say.
So here's the question. Did General Kislak's behavior amount to a violation of the Logan Act, in your opinion?
It certainly could have been a technical violation, but that was not the focus of the FBI or us. That we were really focused on a counterintelligence investigation.
Well, do you realize on January the 4th, the FBI recommended to drop General Flynn from Crossfire Hurricane?
I understand. Well, I know that now. I didn't know that at the time.
But here's my
But
point,
I
Ms.
also believe
Yates.
that was
On
before they had
January
him-
the 4th, the FBI said there's no reason to keep looking at General Flynn. On January the 5th, you have a meeting with the FBI director where you believe he mentions the Logan Act in regard to General Flynn. Is that correct?
What I understand, Senator Graham, is that, and I didn't know at the time because I wasn't privy to the FBI's internal documentation of the counterintelligence investigation.
Did you even know what was going on?
Not specifically with respect to General Flynn, no. I knew
So
that
you
there was
did
a
not know the FBI had a counterintelligence investigation of General Flynn?
No, I did not until
So here's my question. The January 24th interview by General Flynn by 2 FBI agents, did you authorize that interview?
No, I did not.
Did you
But that
counsel
doesn't
the
mean that I don't believe that there was a legitimate basis for that.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
I didn't authorize that interview because I wasn't told about it in advance. But that's not the same thing as saying that I don't believe that there was a legitimate basis for it.
So you believe there was a legitimate basis for the interview?
Yes, I did.
What was that basis?
Well, at the time, Senator Graham, we were in a situation where we had evidence that the Russians were attempting to influence the election to benefit.
The election was over.
Right. If you give me just a second here, I think I can lay it out for you.
No. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to ask questions and you're going to give me answers. What was the basis of the General Flynn interview? Was it part of Crossfire Hurricane?
My understanding, yes, it was.
They just
FBI
recommended
would-
to drop him from Crossfire Hurricane the day before. Was it part
And
of
that
the...
was before they had information
Please.
about
Right.
the calls with Flynn.
Please, we're talking now about the interview of January 4th. Was it to determine if there was a violation of the Logan Act? Was that the basis of the interview?
No, it was not about the Logan Act per se. It was to find out about his conversations that he had had.
Didn't you
with-
have the transcript of his conversations?
That he was providing false information about.
Did you have the transcripts of the conversation between the National Security Advisor? and the
At some
Russian
point, I know we had what we call the cuts at that point. The FBI agents may have had the actual transcripts.
Was this a counterintelligence investigation of the phone call?
This was a counterintelligence investigation of the Trump campaign's potential relationship with the Russians.
That makes no sense. On January the 4th, they recommend to drop Flynn. They mentioned the Logan Act, and you advised against prosecuting the Logan Act. Is that true?
We never made an official decision about whether we were going to do it, but I think it was unlikely, certainly unlikely, that we would pursue a prosecution. That was not our primary concern. It was not a Logan Act violation. It was a counterintelligence concern.
Okay, here's what I want to understand. It's a counterintelligence investigation that led to the interview. You didn't authorize the interview. As a matter of fact, you wanted to go to the White House and tell them about the problem, didn't you?
That's right. I did. I thought that was the more immediate issue.
And
that needed to be addressed.
when you heard about the interview, you got upset, didn't you?
I was upset that Director Comey didn't coordinate that with us and acted unilaterally. Yes, I was.
Okay. Did Comey go rogue?
But you could use that term, yes.
Fine.
But rogue as to the
So wait a minute. Thank you. So here's the point I'm trying to make. Did I violate the Logan Act when I called the Israelis up and suggested that you need to come out against the Iranian nuclear deal because I think it's bad for the United States and Israel, even though that was the policy of the Obama administration?
If you were doing that as a representative of the government, while the Obama administration was in
I'm
place.
not part of the Obama administration.
No, I understand that, but I think the Logan Act is a reflection of our country's longstanding
My
policy.
question is, would a United States senator, in your view, violate the Logan Act if they reached out to a foreign government to express a contrary view of foreign policy?
If you were negotiating on behalf of the U.S. government, you may. But Senator, I have to tell you, the whole prism here that you have, that this is all about the Logan Act, is just not how we were.
Why did somebody bring it up? Why did they mention the Logan Act if it's not about the Logan Act?
Because as I was trying to say just a minute ago, that's a reflection of our long-standing policy in the United States, that you have one president at a time. And this wasn't just...
Is it the long-standing policy of the United States that an incoming administration can't talk to foreign leaders about changing policy?
You can certainly talk to foreign leaders about a potential change in policy in the future, but this wasn't any policy. This was undercutting the sanctions of the U.S. government.
You had one administration leaving in 2 weeks, and you had a new administration coming in urging them, don't escalate. And to anybody who thinks that's a violation of the Logan Act, that is stunning as hell. That means you can't really talk to anybody. You can't hit the ground running. So I just don't understand where the Logan Act came up. And I do believe very deeply that you were surprised that the president knew about the intercept and you didn't. Who told the president of the United States about the intercept between Kislyak and Flynn?
I don't know, but it doesn't surprise me at all.
Have you ever asked anybody?
No, because I would expect that the president would know about a national security threat.
But you didn't know.
Right,
you were surprised you didn't know. Who in the FBI went around you to tell the president?
I don't know that the FBI
Did you ever ask Comey coming out, hey, have you been talking to the president about this and not talking to me?
No, what I asked him was why he knew about it and I didn't, and he hadn't told me.
Well, did he tell the president about it, or do you know?
I don't know who told the president.
You never asked Comey, did you tell the president about this investigation?
No, because Senator, my concern was not that the president knew. It was not only entirely appropriate, but
you
the president
seem very surprised and shocked that he knew and you didn't.
Right, because Director Comey was part of the Department of Justice, and I expected him to tell me about it.
So here's a question, final question.
As it turned out, to be fair to Director Comey, they had told the National Security.
Who's the most likely person to tell the president about the investigation?
It wasn't about an investigation,
About
Senator.
the intercept. About the intercept.
It was, I can't tell you who was the most likely.
Wouldn't it be Comey? Didn't he pull Comey aside?
I think this information was shared with the intelligence community.
Do you think it'd be good to ask Comey about that?
Mr. Chairman, give her a chance to answer.
I'm sorry, Senator, I didn't hear your last question.
I'm sorry. Do you believe the most logical person to tell the president about the intercept was Comey? He's in charge of the investigation.
Well, first, Director Comey wasn't talking to the president about an investigation.
About the intercept.
About the intercept. I don't know if it was Comey or the Director of National Intelligence or who it was. It could have been.
Would the Director of National Intelligence be investigating a violation of the Logan Act?
Because the president, when the Russians so inexplicably reversed course.
Here's my question. Would the intelligence community be investigating a violation of the Logan Act?
Senator,
is that appropriate? Is that appropriate?
I don't know how many times I can say that that wasn't the prism. It was a counterintelligence threat.
No, you keep saying there was no, well, he was dropped from the investigation on January the 4th. They talk about the Logan Act. This makes no sense that you didn't know and the president did, and I'm trying to find out how the president knew and you didn't, and you still can't tell me that. Is that fair to say?
Senator, you won't let me finish the sentence where
Please.
I want to tell you what my understanding is that the agents had suggested that the specific case on General Flynn, because before they knew about the conversations with Ambassador Kislyak.
Still don't get it, but thank you.
Michael Flynn pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI about his conversations with Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak. He also lied to Vice President Pence, who repeated Flynn's lies on national television. You've explained that this made Flynn susceptible to Russian blackmail. The Justice Department now says that the Flynn case should be dismissed because his lies were not material to a legitimate investigation. Do you agree? Why or why not?
Thank you, Senator Feinstein. Well, I would be hard pressed to be able to think of an interview that would have been more material at this point of the counterintelligence investigation that the FBI was conducting to try to be able to get to the bottom of whether there were any individuals, U.S. citizens and those associated with the Trump campaign who were working with the Russians. So the materiality of this was squarely right on point. We had a national security advisor after the Russians had attempted to put a thumb on the scale on our election, who rather than, when he spoke with the Russian ambassador, telling him, stay out of our elections, keep your nose and your paws out of it, even if they want to reset going forward, but to rebuke him and to let him know that we will not tolerate their country trying to intervene and pick our president. Not only did he not do that, he was making nice with it. And then on top of that, you had the very...
Could I stop you for a moment? The question was, are you saying that the Flynn case should be dismissed because the lies were not material to a legitimate investigation?
No, I think, Senator, they were absolutely material to a legitimate investigation. And this investigation was...
Then I guess I'm not understanding what you're saying. Could you try once again?
Sure, I'll try it again. I was trying to lay out for you, Senator, what the situation was at the time that General Flynn was interviewed. And that was, we had General Flynn engaging in discussions with the Russian ambassador that were essentially neutering the American sanctions. And that is a very curious thing to be doing, particularly when the Russians had been acting to benefit President Trump. And then he is covering it up. He's lying about it. So the agents understandably needed to understand what the relationship was here between General Flynn and the Russians, and to try to find out from him who else might have been involved in this. And had General Flynn been honest when the agents came to him, and had he admitted what he had said, then the agents would have found out what the Mueller investigation discovered later. And that is that General Flynn was not acting on his own. And these were not conversations that were just off the top of his head, but rather he had been coordinating all of this with his deputy national security advisor, who was at Mar-a-Lago with other transition team members. And it was a very deliberate, planned set of conversations with the Russian ambassador to essentially tell them, don't worry about it, things are going to change once we're in place.
Okay. When you testified to this committee on May 18th, 2017, you said that Michael Flynn's lies to Vice President Pence about his conversations with Russian Ambassador Kislyak made Flynn vulnerable to Russian blackmail. And, quote, to state the obvious, you do not want your national security advisor compromised by the Russians, end quote. You also said that Flynn's underlying conduct was problematic in and of itself, but you could not go further because it was classified. Transcripts of Flynn's calls with Ambassador Kislyak have now been declassified and released publicly. So why was Flynn's underlying conduct problematic?
Let's come problematic because he was, as I've mentioned, neutering the sanctions that were imposed by the Obama administration on a foreign adversary who was trying to intervene in our election. General Flynn recognized himself that these discussions were problematic, but he admitted to the FBI agents later when he was cooperating with them that he didn't even write down his conversations with the Russian ambassador when he sent a text back to Ms. McFarland, because he knew that those discussions would be viewed as interfering with the foreign policy of the Obama administration, and that would be a problem. That's also why he lied about it and covered it up. So if General Flynn didn't think he was doing anything problematic, then he wouldn't have had a need to cover it up.
Is it possible that Flynn lied to the FBI about his calls with Kislyak to conceal the fact that the Trump administration did not plan to hold Russia accountable for interfering in the election?
That is certainly part of what the FBI needed to be talking to General Flynn about, was to find out why he had these discussions, who else was part of them, and what was behind it. But unfortunately, General Flynn was not truthful with them, so they weren't able to do that. That, again, goes to the materiality.
Inspector Horowitz confirmed that the Crossfire Hurricane investigation was opened at the end of July 2016, when the FBI was told by Australia, a trusted ally and intelligence partner, that the Trump campaign advisor, George Papadopoulos, had advanced knowledge that Russia was planning to release stolen emails to harm Clinton and help Trump. The FBI learned this shortly after WikiLeaks released nearly 20,000 emails stolen by Russia from DNC computers. Wasn't there some obligation for the FBI to investigate, to learn what Russia was doing and who was involved?
Absolutely, Senator. It was really startling information. You know, the FBI, as part of the intel community, was already trying really hard to be able to get to the bottom of Russian interference and to address issues like attribution on the DNC hack. And then when they learned from the friendly foreign government that someone that affiliated with the Russians had actually approached a foreign policy advisor of the Trump campaign and had told him that the Russians had dirt on Hillary Clinton in the form of thousands of emails that could be released anonymously, and wanted to know if the campaign was interested in this. When they found out this information had come in May, and then it actually happened. The emails were then dumped by WikiLeaks in July. This was something that I think everyone would recognize that you have to get to the bottom of.
This May, the Justice Department moved to dismiss the case against Michael Flynn, who pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI. The lead prosecutor resigned from Flynn's, and District Court Judge Emmett Sullivan took the unusual step of appointing an outside lawyer, former Judge John Gleeson, to oppose the department's motion. According to Judge Gleeson, the Justice Department's effort to dismiss Flynn's case is highly irregular and, quote, a gross abuse of prosecutorial power, end quote, in order to, quote, benefit a political ally of President Trump. Do you agree that the department's motion to dismiss Flynn's case is highly irregular? If so, how?
It is highly irregular, Senator. You know, I was a prosecutor at the Department of Justice for almost 30 years, and I've certainly never seen a pleading like this. And as I think I've already discussed some with Senator Graham and with you, from my perspective, there's no issue with respect to the materiality here, nor to the government's ability to be able to prove falsity. Not only because you could look at the transcripts and see the black and white there in terms of it being false, but in fact, General Flynn had twice pled guilty and sworn that he was guilty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Senator Gress.
Ms. Yates, thank you for your public service. You approved the first and second Carter Page FISA applications. Prior to approving, did you review each application in its entirety?
I did, Senator. Yes.
I didn't hear you.
I did, Senator, yes. And do I need to speak more loudly? I'm sorry to interrupt, but
Okay. You told me you did review them in their entirety. Okay.
let me it's possible that there's some boilerplate language that's in every FISA that I might not have reviewed again, but I certainly reviewed all of the factual information in the FISA.
Okay. Number two, when you were interviewed by IG Horowitz's office about your decision to approve the first Carter Page FISA application, you stated the following about Steele's research, quote, while certainly there was an implication that he was doing opposition research, it's got to be for somebody. I mean, he's been hired by someone. My understanding was that the FBI didn't know who, end of quote. The Inspector General said the Steele dossier was quote, central and essential to the Carter Page FISA. If it was clear to you at the time that Steele was conducting opposition research for someone, why didn't you act responsibly to at least have an elementary understanding of the extreme conflicts involved regarding his employment before approving the first FISA application?
Senator, it's my understanding that even the FBI didn't know who had employed Steele at the time of the first FISA. But we were concerned because for the reasons that I had expressed to the Inspector General, logic would tell you that if somebody is out there doing opposition research, there's a limited number of folks that you might expect that to be. But the FBI didn't know, my understanding is at that point, that it was the DNC or Hillary Clinton. And so lawyers in the National Security Division had worked and insisted that there at least be something in the FISA that laid out what they speculated. And it's a very unusual thing to include speculation in an affidavit, but here they felt like it was really important to flag that for the FISA court and to let them know, even though the FBI didn't know that it was being paid for by the DNC, that there certainly was a possibility of that.
In April 2016, President Obama said, quote, I don't talk to the FBI directors about pending investigation, end of quote. In the 302 of your interview with the FBI, you said that in your January 5th, 2017 meeting with Obama and Comey, there was a discussion about Flynn and potential violations of the Logan Act. According to declassified notes summarizing that meeting, President Obama said to Comey, quote, make sure you look at things and have the right people on it, end of quote. How can you square Obama's April 2016 statement with the January 5th, 2017 meeting with Comey and Obama?
Yes, Senator, and as I mentioned in my opening statement, that meeting was not about an investigation at all. And I can tell you that that is something that would have crossed the line. And if President Obama or Vice President Biden or National Security Advisor Rice was in any way trying to influence an investigation, that would have set off alarms for me. This was not about that. This was about the national security implications of continuing to share sensitive information with General Flynn, given what they had learned about his back channel discussion with the Russian ambassador to neuter the sanctions.
Your January 5th, 2017 meeting with President Obama had two parts. The first part included Biden, Comey, Brennan, Clapper, and Rice. The second part was just you, Comey, and the president. In either meeting, did Crossfire Hurricane or the Steele dossier ever come up?
No, sir.
Did you or one of your colleagues ever discuss Crossfire Hurricane or the Steele dossier with President Obama or Vice President Biden?
I know I certainly didn't, and I can't imagine any of my colleagues did.
Okay, I have 8 seconds left. Thanks to Attorney General Barr, material relating to Flynn has finally been released. Those records show the FBI planned to close the Flynn case in early January 2017 until Strzok interceded, that the FBI deliberately set Flynn up to prosecute him or get him fired, and that there was no derogatory information on Flynn. When you were Deputy Attorney General and Acting Attorney General, were you aware of this information?
I'm aware that they had planned to close the specific counterintelligence investigation on General Flynn. My understanding is that was prior to the time they knew anything about these calls with the Russian ambassador. And I was operating under the impression that this interview of General Flynn was in the context of the broader Crossfire Hurricane investigation, that being trying to discern what the connections were between the Trump campaign and the Russians.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Yates.
Why, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Yates, it's good to see you again. We keep talking about General Flynn, whether he lied or not. Of course, President Trump said he did lie to, among others, to Vice President Pence, and that's why he had to fire him. The last time you testified before this committee in May 2017, I asked about your decision as acting Attorney General to notify White House counsel Don McGahn that then National Security Advisor Michael Flynn had been lying to multiple Trump officials, including the Vice President, about his conversations with the Russian ambassador. You supported informing the White House, even though some others did not at the time. You stated that the need to notify the administration became clear as the White House issued increasingly specific and emphatic denials that Flynn had discussed sanctions with the Russian ambassador, which of course increased Mr. Flynn's vulnerability to blackmail. Do you believe General Flynn was effectively compromised?
I certainly believe then and believe now that there was a risk of that compromise, and that's why it was so important to get this information to the White House so that they could act. And the conversations themselves were concerning, and that was a proper basis to be part of the counterintelligence investigation. But you have to balance the investigation also with the need to address the compromise threat that presented itself most urgently. And in doing that balancing, I thought that we needed to go tell the White House right away so that they could act, and so that others who presumably did not know that the information they were providing to the American people was false, so they would quit doing that.
And I think you were probably not surprised when President Trump removed General Flynn. But do you believe that by encouraging Russia to not react to U.S. sanctions, Flynn undercut our nation's response to Russia's attack on our elections?
I do. I think that's one of the concerns, Senator. As I mentioned, the purpose of the sanctions was both to punish and deter. And when General Flynn was essentially saying, never mind on those sanctions, we're just going to move forward, that certainly doesn't send the message to the Russians that we want them to stay out of our elections.
It undercuts our efforts.
It certainly does.
Thank you. Now, some of Mr. Flynn's staunchest defenders have argued that because the FBI suspected Flynn may continue to lie about his conversations with the Russian ambassador. He was entrapped when he was interviewed by the FBI. In your view, is it ever entrapment for investigators to give an individual an opportunity to tell the truth about an issue relevant to their investigation?
No, it's not. And actually, here, the agents even took that a step further. They not only asked General Flynn open-ended questions to give him an opportunity to tell them the truth about what had happened in his conversations with the Russian ambassador. When he, for example, at the beginning, gave nothing but innocuous points that had come up and nothing at all about sanctions or about the United Nations vote, they then tried to help trigger his memory for him and reminded him of specific things, sometimes even using the exact language he had used in the calls. You know, if you're trying to set somebody up to lie, which I don't really know how you set somebody up to lie, you don't generally try to help them out like that.
Yeah, you either lie or you don't lie. Last week, the Attorney General claimed the Flynn interview was untethered to any legitimate investigation. One, do you agree with that? And do you believe a legitimate predicate existed to interview Flynn in January, given what you'd learned about his December calls with the Russian ambassador and his subsequent misrepresentations of those calls?
Absolutely, Senator. Well, I believe that the most urgent thing was to notify the White House. Interviewing General Flynn was really right at the core of the FBI's investigation at this point, to try to discern what are the ties between the Trump administration and the Russians.
Thank you. And the Inspector General informed this committee the only surveillance targeting any Trump campaign official involved Carter Page. I will submit some questions in writing about that. But can you speak to whether the government was specifically targeting Flynn with surveillance when it intercepted his calls with the Russian ambassador?
No, the surveillance was not of General Flynn. I am still not permitted to tell you what it was. In fact, we checked with the Department of Justice just a couple of days ago before I testified, because I would like to be able to specifically tell you what it was. But there was no surveillance of General Flynn.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Lay. Very quickly before I turn to Senator Cornyn, I want to make sure I understand this. The interview with General Flynn, were you investigating a policy difference between the Trump administration and the Obama administration?
No, Senator, we were not investigating a policy difference.
Well, you weren't investigating a crime, were you?
We were investigating a counterintelligence threat.
Okay, is it a counterintelligence investigation based on a policy difference?
It's a counterintelligence investigation based on the Russian systematic attempts to
wait a minute. This is very important. Your beef with Flynn was he was undercutting Obama policy. Is that what you were worried about?
Well, what we were worried about was that he was undercutting Obama policy, and then he was covering it up.
No, he hadn't even talked to the FBI. You sent the FBI over, weren't you and there was no leak of anything. So isn't it the fact you're really investigating a policy difference?
No, Senator, it's not accurate. There was a cover-up before this. In fact, that's what prompted my concerns, was that he was providing false information to the vice president and to others.
When did you know about that? When did you know about that?
Yes, I did. That preceded this, Senator. That's why I wanted to go to the White House.
So why didn't you go to the White House and say, is this your policy position?
The concern was not about the policy difference here, Senator. The concern was about him undercutting the Obama administration and then covering it up.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, insofar as you followed up on my question that time, I should note that she has said before they're following a counterintelligence threat,
which was closed on January the 4th.
Senator, I'm sorry, that's just not accurate. It was not closed on January.
Recommended to be closed on January the 4th, the day before the meeting. And the only problem here is that you didn't like Flynn changing the policy or talking about changing the policy. That he had every right to do that. And what we're doing here is we're criminalizing policy differences. That's why Flynn got prosecuted, because they hate his guts. Senator Cornyn.
Ms. Yates, let me change the subject a little bit. Based on your long and distinguished service with the Department of Justice, are you aware of any precedent for both of the major party nominees for President of the United States being investigated either for a crime or a counterintelligence investigation in the run-up to a presidential election?
No.
Me either. Let me ask you, during the investigation of Hillary Clinton over her email server, James Comey, the FBI director, had a press conference, as you know, on July the 5th, where he talked about the investigation, talked about derogatory information collected during that investigation, but yet said no reasonable prosecutor would prosecute that case. Did you know before July the 5th, 2016, that he was going to do that? Did you know when he reopened the case after Anthony Weiner's computer was looked at, did you know he was going to reopen the case?
Yes.
Beforehand?
I can't tell you, and candidly, Senator, that was more than 4 years ago now, and I didn't go back and try to review any of that. I know I knew about it. I can't tell you whether it was beforehand or contemporaneous with that.
Would you agree with me it was Director Comey's conduct was highly irregular?
I don't know how to characterize his conduct, Senator.
You don't know how to characterize it, did it? He was the FBI director is a direct report to the Deputy Attorney General, correct?
That's correct.
So from the time Crossfire Hurricane was opened on July the 31st until you signed the first FISA application on October the 21st, did Director Comey keep you apprised of what the investigation showed?
We had interactions. I met with the FBI 3 times a week on national security matters, and also met with the National Security Division. I certainly was provided with some information, but I will tell you, I don't think that the FBI was providing us with as much information as they should have now that I know more about the investigation. And I would agree with Inspector General Horwitz's recommendation that in matters like this, that there should be both consultation with department leadership as well as more thorough briefings.
Thank you. I guess you would also agree that Director Comey should have consulted with you and the Attorney General in the run-up during his dealings with the Hillary Clinton investigation before making those kind of public comments. That violates the rules and norms of the Department of Justice. Wouldn't you agree?
I certainly think that he should have consulted with us, yes.
He said he thought that Loretta Lynch had a conflict of interest because of the tarmac meeting between President Clinton and the Attorney General during the course of the Hillary Clinton email investigation, but that would not have prevented him from consulting with you. Did he do so?
Well, did he consult with me on what precisely? I want to make sure I'm as accurate as possible here.
Did he consult with you on the Hillary Clinton investigation and his intentions to go public with the investigation and usurp the role of the Department of Justice when it comes to whether to charge or not charge somebody with a crime? Did he talk to you about that ahead of time?
We did not have a substantive discussion about it ahead of time, no.
Does that surprise you? I mean, you're the direct supervisor of the FBI director. If he didn't consult with you or tell you what he was doing, or he didn't respond to your inquiries about it, wouldn't that strike you as highly unusual?
It's not ideal.
Not ideal. Well, that's quite an understatement.
It is an understatement, Senator.
Okay, we'll agree on that. So on May the 9th, 2017, Rod Rosenstein, your successor as Deputy Attorney General, wrote a memo with regard to Director Comey's activities, during which he said that Director Comey did violate the norms and rules of the Department of Justice. And he said since he showed no remorse and was likely to repeat that conduct again, that he recommended his dismissal. Did you agree with Rod Rosenstein's analysis in that memo?
Senator, I'm not going to weigh in on what a successor of mine, a decision that he made when he was in.
You're not going to answer my question.
Well, I just don't think it's appropriate for me to weigh in on that. So
well, I'm not asking you to weigh in, Ms. Yates. I'm asking you to answer a question about the highest levels of the Department of Justice and whether this is the new norm or whether Director Comey violated those norms and his dismissal was justified on that basis. You have no opinion about that.
Senator, I'm not going to weigh in on whether Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein's memo was accurate or not, but I will say that I was concerned at the time, regardless of how out of bounds Director Comey may have been in the actions that he took on the Clinton case. I was concerned that that was used as subterfuge for the real reason to fire.
Well, it strikes me that Director Comey was out of control, and as his direct supervisor, I assume that you would be concerned about that, and you might have called him to task for that and asked him to change his conduct.
Senator Durbin.
Ms. Yates, welcome back.
Thank you.
And let me congratulate you before I go any further. Today marks the second time during the Trump administration that you've testified before this committee. That sum of appearances equals the total number of times that Attorney General Sessions, Acting Attorney General Whitaker, and Attorney General Barr have appeared before this committee in their official capacity combined. So congratulations. We can't seem to bring the Attorney General here, but former Attorney Generals are always welcome. Thank you very much for being here. I'd like to ask for a moment for a reflection on Michael Flynn and ask about the following. Flynn apparently had suspicious contacts with Russia starting at least in 2015 when he sat next to Vladimir Putin at a dinner in Moscow. Flynn accepted payments from multiple Russian entities like RT, Kaspersky Labs, the Volga Airlines, and he failed to report these payments on his financial disclosure forms when he became National Security Advisor to President Trump. According to the Mueller report, during the 2016 campaign, Flynn worked with individuals who claimed to be in contact with Russian-affiliated hackers in an effort to obtain Hillary Clinton's emails. Flynn also signed a contract to work with the Turkish government during the campaign, and he lied about his work for Turkey on his Foreign Affairs Registration Act filings. In December of 2016, Flynn had 4 phone conversations with Russian Ambassador Kislyak in which he urged Russia not to respond to U.S. sanctions that the Obama administration had imposed because of Russian election interference in the United States. And that is the policy difference, I think, that has been alluded to. At no point during these calls did Flynn express any disapproval of Russia's election interference in the United States. Ms. Yates, understanding that you can't get into classified details, can you tell us whether the administration was specifically surveilling Michael Flynn when it identified these phone calls with Kislyak?
The administration absolutely was not surveilling Michael Flynn. As I think I mentioned in the opening, President Obama we were all trying to figure out why is it the Russians aren't responding now, aren't retaliating after the sanctions, as they had indicated that they would. And that's when then the FBI discovered the conversations with Ambassador Kislyak.
So the policy difference here apparently was the belief of the Obama administrations that Putin should pay a price for interfering in the United States election by imposing sanctions on Russia. And what appears to be a phone call from Flynn, aspiring to be the national security advisor to the new president, tell him, don't worry about it. And you were wondering why Putin was not responding and considering whether this phone call had an impact on it? Is that true?
That's right, Senator. And, punishing and deterring the Russians for trying to throw our election doesn't seem like a policy to me. It seems like that's something that all Americans would support.
Yes, I would think they would. Certainly someone aspiring to be the national security advisor to the President of the United States. Flynn later lied about his conversations with Kislyak to the FBI and to Vice President Pence, denying that he talked about sanctions, stepped down as national security advisor in February 2017. But before he did, Ms. Yates, on January 26th and 27th of 2017, you briefed White House counsel Don McGahn about Michael Flynn. You shared the Justice Department's concern about Flynn's communications with Russia, his dishonesty about those communications, and his vulnerability to blackmail. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yet, unbelievably, after you had briefed the White House counsel about Flynn's vulnerability to blackmail and his dishonesty, on January 28th, 2017, President Trump spoke on the phone for nearly an hour with Vladimir Putin while General Flynn sat in the Oval Office with him. Is that a fact?
That's what I read. I don't know that personally, but I have read that.
Well, I've read it and seen it. I understand there's a White House photo showing General Flynn sitting in the Oval Office during that call. Ms. Yates, in your view, was it appropriate for Michael Flynn to sit in on phone calls with Vladimir Putin after you'd provided your briefings to Don McGahn?
Well, Senator, when I went over to brief Don McGahn, we made it very clear to them that we were providing them this information so that they could take action. And so certainly it would be surprising to me that of all things, you would have General Flynn sitting in on a phone call with Vladimir Putin.
And what kind of message do you think it sent to Russia for Flynn to be involved in that call?
It seems like it sends the same kind of message that General Flynn was sending in the phone calls with Ambassador Kislyak, which is, don't worry about the interference.
If you believe that Russian interference in American elections is a threat to our democracy, and I do, and most others do as well, then this approach by General Flynn is antithetical to what we consider to be the basic fundamentals of our nation. And a man, certainly a man aspiring to be national security advisor to the president, should know better. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Thank you. Yeah, I remember the conversation with President Obama and Medvedev, or I can't remember the prime minister's name. After the election, I'll have more latitude. I remember the reset button. So maybe administrations want to change positions with different countries. It's not so unusual. But very quickly, for Senator Lee, did you know of efforts by Russia to interfere in the election before the election itself?
Yes.
Did you impose any sanctions before the election?
Well, I don't have authority to impose any sanctions.
What did you do to try to stop the Russians before the election?
Oh, there was a lot, Senator. I think you may recall in October, there was an intelligence briefing, a public briefing.
What did you do to stop the Russians? Specifically. What did the administration do to stop the Russians from interfering after they knew they were trying?
Oh, my understanding is, Senator, that the intelligence community and the administration, this is not something the Deputy Attorney General would be involved in.
What did they do? What did they do? Did they impose sanctions?
They did not impose sanctions.
Did they call the Russians up and say stop?
Actually, I do believe that there were communications with the Russians in that regard.
Do you agree with me it didn't work?
If I could finish my answer, Senator. Yeah. There was concern at the time, and this was in connection with the October public statement that was made, that the Obama administration wanted to be very careful that it wasn't doing anything that would impact the election or be perceived to be impacting the election. And so the information that was put out then was to make sure, for example, when the Russians were rooting around in the state election systems, to put out the information, which, by the way, there was no evidence that it actually impacted or that they were able to get into anything that would impact.
I agree with that.
I want to be careful about that.
I agree with that.
When they were rooting around in there, the Obama administration was contacting the states and trying to make sure that they understood they needed to shore it up. My further understanding is they wanted to make a bipartisan statement at that point, and there were folks on your side of the aisle that refused to participate.
Yeah, but here's my point. You knew the Russians were up to no good, and you did nothing about it effectively. So we don't need a lecture from the Obama administration about being tough on Russia. You had plenty of knowledge, and apparently nothing happened. Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Yates, while you were the Deputy Attorney General, was it your policy that both administrations should be treated equally? That is, would there have been any reason from a Department of Justice standpoint to approach an Obama administration official differently from a Trump administration official?
No, Senator, we didn't. In fact, we made that very determination when I was really insistent that we notify the White House about General Flynn. It was in part because I wanted to make sure that we were treating the Trump administration the same way that we would the Obama administration.
Okay, so had that occurred here, what would that have consisted of? What would it have looked like had you treated an official from the Trump administration the same as you would have in the Obama administration? Who would have been notified before any of this could have proceeded?
Well, when we say any of this, we did do the same thing. We did go to the White House and notify the White House counsel about what we had learned about General Flynn. What would have been different, though, is with respect, I'm not sure why my lights just went out. What would have been different is that with respect to the interview of General Flynn, from a protocol standpoint, I would have notified the White House counsel in advance before that interview.
Okay. Did anything like that happen here? I mean, was anyone from the Trump team notified?
Prior to the interview, no. That was one of my concerns about it, but this was a protocol issue, not a legal issue.
Okay. But that was certainly something that would have been an irregularity. You've acknowledged then that the Obama administration treated the incoming Trump administration differently. The Department of Justice treated the incoming Trump administration differently than it would have the Obama administration.
No, Senator, we were working really hard to make sure that we did not treat them differently.
I understand you were working hard to do that, but that wasn't, in fact, the outcome. The protocol was different. You deviated from the ordinary protocol.
Well, the difference in the protocol here is that the FBI conducted the interview of General Flynn without a courtesy call to the White House counsel.
Okay, when you told when you told Director Comey that there should have been a discussion about recording the interview, in raising these things with Comey, he responded with something like, "You can understand why I did this." To which, according to your 302, you responded no, and Comey responded he didn't want to look political, and that the 302 also notes that you were offended by that implication. Can you elaborate on this? Tell me why you were offended and what specifically offended you.
Senator, you probably heard me say too many times now, I was a prosecutor at DOJ for almost 30 years. I prosecuted public corruption cases as an AUSA, Democrats and Republicans. And the way we do our job, or did our job at DOJ, was that you don't consider political implications in making prosecutive or investigative decisions. And I was offended by Director Comey's implication that he would be perceived differently than I would.
Got it. Let me ask you, was it irregular for agents to plan to attempt to, quote, get him to lie so we can prosecute him or get him fired before the interview, as stated in Bill Priestap's notes? Is that an irregularity?
I'm sorry, Senator. I lost our Wi-Fi connection here, and all I heard was at the end, was that an irregularity?
Yes.
Would you mind repeating the question, please?
For agents to plan to get to, quote, get him to lie so we can prosecute him or get him fired.
Well, certainly that's not an appropriate way for the FBI to conduct itself. I don't believe that that's what they did with respect to General Flynn. And I think if you read the 302, it's pretty clear about it.
Is it irregular for McCabe to have pressured General Flynn to appear without counsel
I don't want to pressure him to appear without counsel.
All right. Just to make clear, I want to get to the bottom of what went wrong. So, how was a FISA application to surveil an American citizen and a major party presidential campaign approved with 17 significant errors and omissions? And no one knew until the Department of Justice Inspector General conducted an audit. An audit, by the way, that would have never been conducted had the surveillance not involved a staffer of a future president's campaign. Had President Trump lost in 2016, these significant errors and omissions would never have come to light, would they?
Oh, I don't know that. Inspector General Horwitz, I've known him for a long time. He's a very thorough guy, so I wouldn't count on that necessarily being a different result then.
Were you aware that agents were using information compiled by Christopher Steele at the request of the DNC at the time you signed either the initial Carter Page FISA application or the first renewal?
I was not aware that the DNC was funding it, but I think we suspected that there was a chance, but we did not know that to be a fact. And in fact, the Inspector General did not identify that as an error, which, by the way, not to quibble here, there were 7 errors, not 17, and the FISAs that I signed, but 1 error is too many.
Mr. Chairman, if I can ask one more brief question. Were you aware of the concerns with the reliability of the information that was provided by Christopher Steele and what we now refer to as the Steele dossier before signing either the initial Carter Page FISA application or the first renewal?
No, I wasn't, Senator. And I think a lot of those concerns come from the interview of the subsource that took place after I signed both the original and the first renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I see my time's expired.
Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you. Ms. Yates, let me ask you a couple of, I think, pretty simple questions, if you could hear me out here. The first is that the sort of origin story here is a telephone call between Ambassador Kislyak and General Flynn. You became aware of that in the course of regular counterintelligence activities, correct?
That's correct.
Were you surveilling General Flynn, or were you surveilling Ambassador Kislyak?
I can tell you what we were doing, and that is surveilling General Flynn. I'm still not permitted to tell you what we were doing. That's still classified. Much as I would like to tell you, I can't.
Gotcha. So we'll just let logic follow through. It would not be unusual for a sovereign nation to monitor the communications of a rival nation's ambassador, irrespective of which nation you're in, correct? That's pretty standard counterintelligence practice?
If you don't mind, Senator, I'm just not going to hint at that. I want to stay really clear on the classification rules here.
But you're being really clear that you are not surveilling General Flynn.
Absolutely not.
So the next thing you know of this conversation because you've overheard it. And the White House at very high levels, including the Vice President, is denying that that conversation took place, the conversation that you knew happened. What is the counterintelligence problem with that set of circumstances? A national security advisor who has had a conversation with a Russian ambassador that the Vice President is denying took place.
Well, there's a counterintelligence concern about the conversations to begin with, given the fact that he was undercutting sanctions against the Russians for interfering in our election.
Is it a counterintelligence problem if the Russians, does it raise the prospect that General Flynn had lied to the Vice President and that the Russian ambassador would know that and be able to exert leverage on the national security advisor?
Exactly, Senator. And you layer on top of that he has then lied to
There's a larger
Vice
policy question around it, but there's a very specific issue right there, correct?
That's correct.
And it gives the Russians leverage against Mr. Flynn, possibly. General Flynn.
That was our concern, is that
That's the counterintelligence concern.
Potential conflicts, yes.
So let me take you to a different question. You have been asked that if you knew of the errors and omissions that the Inspector General found in the FISA warrants, would you sign the warrant? And I think the answer that every prosecutor, myself included, must give to that question is no. Of course, we would never submit to a court a warrant application that we knew contained errors or omissions. That is correct, is it not?
That's correct.
But that does not, to my mind, as somebody who's been in that situation, that does not end the inquiry. The question then is, if you had been aware of the errors and omissions in the FISA warrant, one response would be to shut down the investigation and roll it up. A second would be to find out why the hell the errors and omissions were there, investigate the misconduct that led to that, but go ahead with the investigation because it remained predicated and worth pursuing. Both of those are possible options, are they not? I'm sorry?
Yes, they are. Both are possible options.
And in
As well
fact,
as-
if we were in a situation in which any error or omission in a warrant affidavit ended the underlying investigation, a lot of criminal conduct and legitimate investigations would be improperly brought to a premature conclusion, correct? I'm sorry, say it again, we're not...
Yes, sorry, that's true.
And that's pretty standard prosecutor 101. If there's something that you think might be wrong with a warrant that you're being asked to sign, you get that fixed, but you don't necessarily end the investigation, correct?
And you need to find out whether there is other evidence and other information that would support the. But you would also want to get to the bottom of why it was you hadn't been told.
No,
the correct
correct. You do an
information.
internal investigation to try to get to the bottom of why you were presented a warrant application with errors and omissions. But my point is a very simple one. That does not mean the end of the investigation necessarily. In fact,
Not
this is not
necessarily.
necessarily uncommon. You solve your problem and you go ahead with your investigation if it's properly predicated and justified, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
And on a stroke of bipartisanship, I agree with everything you just said. That's exactly the way it should work. And I want to let Ms. Yates know that I have no doubt that when she signed the application, she did so in good faith, relying on information to be truthful, and that she would not have defrauded the court, and I have no belief that she did. Who next? Mr. Hawley, Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Yates, for being here. Why don't we just pick up right there? Because the chairman says that he has no doubt that you had no intent to defraud the court. I noticed when Mr. Rosenstein was here before this committee, I'm sure you saw his testimony or read it a few weeks ago, he said that he couldn't be to blame or otherwise be held accountable for the falsified FISA applications, the many material misstatements of fact, because he just relied on the representations that were made to him. So we're left wondering, who exactly is responsible here? It seems that nobody's really responsible. Somehow or another, a federal court, a secret federal court, was actively misled, lied to, and presented with falsified evidence, but nobody in the chain of command is to blame. So let me just ask you about your own responsibility. Did you actually read these FISA applications? You did? That's your testimony
Yes.
today?
Yes,
You told the Inspector General that you had no recollection, actually, of reviewing renewal application number 1. Is your testimony today different?
No, I think what I told the Inspector General is I didn't have a specific recollection of sitting at my desk and asking questions about it, but I most assuredly reviewed it.
You said that you did not have any specific recollection of reviewing renewal application number 1, but today you say you did? That's great if you did, because I'd like to ask you some more detailed questions. I just want to get clear on this testimony.
Yes, I did.
Interesting. Now, you told the Inspector General that the Carter Page FISA applications that you signed off on and that you now say that you read and carefully reviewed, that these applications, by the way, that contained multiple material misstatements and would later contain falsified evidence, you said that these were not a close call. You also told the IG that you thought that the application, the initial application, and the renewals were appropriate steps, and you didn't have any qualms about them. Do you recall what the FISA court said about these applications?
Yes, Senator. And when I was speaking with the Inspector General, I was referring to the applications based on the assumption that all of the information was accurate. What was learned later, and what the FISA court was responding to later, is that there were errors and omissions in this.
Well, the errors and omissions were there at the time that you signed off on them, were they not? And you just testified that you read them closely. So they were there when you signed off on them, correct?
That's correct. They were.
Okay, let me remind you what the FISA court said. I'll just read this into the record. The FBI's handling of the Carter Page applications, which you approved and you now say you read, was antithetical to the heightened duty of candor owed to the court. The frequency with which representations made by FBI personnel turned out to be unsupported or contradicted by information in their possession, and with which they withheld information detrimental to their case, calls into question whether information contained in other FBI applications is reliable, end quote. Are you still of the view that these applications were not a close call at all, and you would do the same thing now? I mean, these were appropriate steps, I think, was your testimony to the IG. You stand by that?
Yes, Senator. I think if you properly put my testimony in context when I spoke with the Inspector General, I was referring to the decision that I made at the time based on the factual information that was presented to me and known to us.
So you were a passive party in this. I mean, you did testify now in contrast to what you testified to the IG earlier, but you're telling us now today you did read the applications, but you were also duped by the FBI, and so it's for that reason you signed off on misleading applications that a FISA court said were so bad and so misleading they call into question all of the submissions by the FBI. So you're a passive party. Is that your testimony today?
No, sir. Senator, I was not passive at all.
Then what did you do to actually exert some sort of control and exercise responsibility? And let me just ask you this, what responsibility do you bear for the deliberate and systematic misleading of a secret federal court?
As the Deputy Attorney General and the number 2 person of the Justice Department, I was responsible for the actions of every single employee at DOJ, all 113,000 of them. That includes everybody at FBI and DEA and ATF and all the U.S. attorney's offices and all the lawyers at the Department of Justice. I was responsible in that sense for the actions of all of them.
So do you regret the fact that you signed applications that contained false and misleading material that a court says now calls into question their ability to rely on anything that the FBI says?
Oh, I certainly regret that the Department of Justice submitted with the FBI FISA applications that were inaccurate. I think that is antithetical to our responsibility to the FISA court. I think it is also inconsistent with what my experience with the FBI had been in terms of their preparation of affidavits and the accuracy of them.
Let me ask you just about one other thing, Mr. Chairman. I see my time has expired. So let me just, one final question. I noticed that you said, Ms. Yates, to the IG that you didn't know who Christopher Steele was working for. In fact, you opined to the IG that you thought maybe he was working for the Republican Party. Of course, we know from Steele himself, Steele told the IG that Steele told the FBI in July of 2016 that he'd been hired by the Democrats. We also know that your deputy, Bruce Orr, knew that Steele was working for the Democrats. And the same deputy, Bruce Orr, your deputy, while he was working for you, was actively facilitating contacts between the FBI and Steele, and also between the State Department and Steele. How did this happen on your watch? Is it normal for you to permit your deputies to facilitate contacts between political parties and the FBI and the State Department? Is that routine behavior?
Permitting Bruce Orr to do anything. As the Inspector General found, I was completely unaware of Bruce Orr's actions.
I'm sorry, could you, I didn't hear that. Can you repeat that?
I wasn't allowing Bruce Orr to do anything. As the Inspector General found in the IG report to which you have referred, that I was completely unaware of Bruce Orr's actions, and Bruce Orr had no involvement from our side in any of the Russia investigation or the Carter Page FISAs.
I'll just say in conclusion, Mr. Chairman, that I seem to detect a pattern here. Ms. Yates testifies she has no idea what her deputy is doing as he facilitates contact between a political party opposition research and the FBI. She has no idea that these applications that she signed materially misled a federal court. Just as Rosenstein said, he had no idea. Nobody appears to know anything in this government, and yet somehow a federal court was deliberately and systematically misled so severely that they now say they can't trust anything that the FBI did. If this doesn't call for a cleaning of house at DOJ and the FBI, I don't know what is, and I just know that Bruce Orr is still on the payroll at the Department of Justice. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Coons.
Yeah.
I'm
Mr.
sorry, we want a
Chairman.
5-minute break. I apologize, Ms. Yates.
Mr. Chairman.
We'll take a break from Ms. Yates.
I see no reason for those remarks. They're inflammatory. I think the witness ought to be able to respond if she chooses.
She certainly may, and let me just get my 2 cents worth. I don't think they're inflammatory at all. I think it's the truth. Bruce Orr is apparently going rogue. You got her deputy orchestrating interviews and meetings, and he tells the FBI in November, you need to watch Steele. What the hell's going on over there?
I don't
That's
think
why
you
we're
could-
doing this.
I don't. Since my remarks are the ones that were just challenged, Mr. Chairman, I'll just say with all due respect, we have a deliberate and systematic misleading of a federal court here. I don't think you can say anything more inflammatory than what the federal court itself said when they issued an incredible statement. I've never seen a federal court, let alone the FISA court, issue, saying that they now had no confidence in any of the submissions of the FBI based on the level of lying.
Well,
that
everybody's
came
to
them.
blame and nobody's to blame.
Exactly.
Is the problem we have. We'll take a 5-minute break and we'll let her respond.
Okay, let me,
They're going to take a 5-minute break, so I don't know.
well, good. They can take it.
Go to the ends of the earth
Right now.
We got something crazy.
and reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking,
I'm open to the idea of being a human being.
innovative, and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
COVID has taken the lives of tens of thousands of Americans. Rural areas like this here on Navajo Nation are especially hit hard.
15 to 30% of our Navajo citizens don't have running water.
In any indigenous reservation, there is a shortage of physicians.
Native Americans are amongst the most vulnerable and hardest hit by COVID.
Yeah, the more we lose our elders to COVID-19, the more we lose our language and our way of life.
We need to bring awareness to the attention of Washington, D.C. and United States citizens that there is a need to focus on the first citizens of this country.
In 60 years, we went from about 100,000 factory workers to probably about 7,000.
Off in the distance, you can see some factories that are still humming, but most of them are just kind of abandoned.
The restaurant industry right now is one of the largest and fastest growing industries in America. And yet it continues to be the absolute lowest paying employer in the United States.
Barely anybody's making enough to live.
You're donating plasma to get by.
It's literally a slave wage.
I don't remember growing up like this. My mom didn't have to go to food banks. It's pretty sad.
Even really young kids are feeling what's going on right now. How should parents be talking to them about this whole question of racial justice?
How do we embrace this moment and turn it into real change?
What we really must focus on is moving from protesting to policy.
Join Gail, Anthony, and Tony on CBS This Morning.
CBSN Los Angeles. Get local news, breaking news, anytime, anywhere.
It's easy to find us, and it's free.
Download the CBS News app on your favorite devices. CBSN Los Angeles, streaming 24/7.
You can watch CBSN 24/7.
We've got an amazing story to share with you.
understand you have some breaking news.
How does it all play out?
It's quite an adventure here at CBSN.
It's been a day.
Today, we went to the National Mall and to speak with historian Lonnie Bunch. What do you think history teaches us about this moment we're in?
This is a time for us not to rest.
State police are here. You can see them behind me holding down this block. Behind them are the firefighters. They are dousing the flames.
Do you think racism is deeply rooted in Minnesota?
It's deeply rooted in America.
It has been a day of raw emotion here in Minneapolis as this city and the country mourned a man whose death has inspired a movement. We are witnessing it right now.
It is my fervent prayer that we all will commit to actively engage in working on a heart change and model the most powerful four-letter word in any language, and that is love.
What do you hope comes from this?
To be honest, this is what's coming from it. This is what's coming. The change is here.
If George Floyd's death is a tipping point, this is the center of it.
The CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell from Washington, D.C.
An extraordinary moment in America.
Can you understand the anger that we see over here? Absolutely. I understand the anger.
Do you think there's systemic racism, and how should we address it?
There's a lot of progress still to be made.
What are the questions white Americans should be asking?
Questions about racial disparities.
The mood of the country now has significantly changed. Do you think when it comes to reforming police in this country and healing race relations in this country, we have reached a tipping point? Let's get some clarity on a variety of issues. How do we get people to actually follow the guidelines that we know can work?
All small businesses are struggling at this time, but what are you hearing from minority business owners in particular?
In your view, what needs to happen before kids can go back to school?
John, help us understand this. People still are having a hard time getting the message about the testing. Why is the testing so crucial?
You have to know where the enemy is. You know, this is a war.
So we have some breaking news for you out of the Joe Biden campaign. The former vice president says that he will not be traveling to Milwaukee to accept his party's nomination. Instead, he's going to accept the nomination virtually from his home in Delaware. Of course, this is all because of the coronavirus. The conventions of the years before, they have gone by the wayside in the with a new focus on public health. And so the convention is going to kick off on August 17th. It's going to be basically virtual. There are going to be a number of speakers coming remotely from their homes, and Vice President Joe Biden accepting the nomination from his home as well. President Trump has sort of floated the conversation about where he plans on accepting his party's nomination, but he hasn't actually officially made an announcement yet, though he floated the idea of possibly doing it in the Rose Garden. So there's a lot to talk about today when it comes to politics, right? You're really lucky because Ed O'Keefe, who broke this story for us, who delivered this information to us about Joe Biden, is going to be on our show at 1 o'clock and answer all the questions you need to know about the former vice president's campaign, as well as the latest coming out of Washington. Well, we have been hit with more sobering milestones in the coronavirus pandemic. More than 700,000 people around the world have died because of this virus. Here in the U.S., here's what the numbers look like. Nearly 1,400 deaths were reported yesterday alone, and at least 1,000 fatalities were recorded on 7 of the last 9 days. Okay, so 1,000 a day. That brings the death rate up to an alarming 24% in the last week. But here is maybe some good news. In that same 7-day span, also, we saw a 9% decline in new infections. More than 57,000 new cases were confirmed in the U.S. on Tuesday, bringing the total nationwide closer to 5 million. So, to talk more about the latest news on COVID, the medical developments and other things, we want to bring in Dr. Bob Lahita. It's always so good to talk to you, Dr. Bob. Let's get right into some of the therapeutics that are making headlines. COVID patients who are receiving blood plasma transfusions that are rich in antibodies seem to be having a seem to show a lower mortality rate. That's the good news. But like what we have seen happening over and over again is as soon as there seems to be something positive about a therapeutic, then the demand increases and there may be a problem with getting this plasma to the people that we need to get it to. And so that could also have an impact on the outcome of these studies. So what can you tell us about the use of antibody-rich plasma?
Okay, Anne-Marie, thanks for having me, and I'll explain that. It's a little bit complicated. We are in the throes of a research project for hospitalized patients. So this plasma is only useful in patients who are acutely ill in the hospital. Now, the problem is we have to identify people who have recovered from COVID-19 who have high levels of what we call neutralizing antibody. That's an immunoglobulin that neutralizes the virus. And it is produced in copious amounts in people who have been infected and have recovered. Now, you have to go to an area where that can be removed from your body as an antibody, purified, and then reinfused back into a person who is acutely ill with COVID-19. The data that we see is that the mortality based on infusion of these purified antibodies into patients who have COVID-19, the mortality dropped by 50%. It went from 7% mortality to 13% mortality. It went from 13% to 7% mortality, which was basically halved. And that is incredibly positive data. The problem is there's no control study here because everybody's getting the neutralizing antibody when it's possible to receive it. We've had problems identifying patients with high titer antibody, and we've had problems in them going to a blood bank and getting pheresed, that is the removal of their plasma, that's the non-blood cell part of the blood, and then it gets purified, and then it gets sent off to the hospital, and that's infused into patients that are very, very sick. So it's not an easy process. It's something that's been around for almost 2 centuries, and that is getting acute antibody that is from a patient convalescing into a patient who is very, very sick.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I think is so confounding about this virus is that it feels like you just don't, if you get it, it's a crapshoot. You don't know how severely you're going to be impacted. I'm not talking about people who are most likely to die. We know that underlying conditions, older people, their mortality rates are higher. But I see people who are pretty sort of young and healthy, and boy, this virus takes them out. And even after they've kind of gotten over the sickest part of it, they still seem to have issues afterwards. So there are studies now shedding a little more light on who is most likely to suffer the most should they contract this virus. What do we know?
What we know is that the body responds to a viral infection in a very interesting immunologic fashion. I'm going to make it as simple as I can. There's a substance in the patients called interferon. This is something we've known about for decades, and interferon always goes up when somebody is infected with a virus. There are people who don't have, for reasons that may be genetic or otherwise, in appropriate levels of interferon as a result of the virus infection. Now, that being one thing, what's going on and what has been reported is that the immune system in the case of COVID-19 infection goes a little berserk. Generally, there's a very orderly process. There's something called the innate immune response, which is a rapid immune response that happens once you're infected, followed by a couple days later an adaptive immune response, which means that's when you get the antibody, the protein against the virus, and that's when you get the cellular response. Now, that is usually divided, at least in the article that I read, into 3 levels. One is a viral response. Second is a parasite response, and third is a fungus bacteria response. Most patients have just a viral response, but in some patients who are very sick, the immune system goes a little haywire, and all 3 of these responses go into effect. And the substance that's key here, and there are about 200 versions of this, the substance that's key is called a cytokine, and that's a communication molecule between the cells of the person's body. These cytokines are raised tremendously. And some people you've heard, and I'm sure your viewers have heard of cytokine storm. That's where the cytokines are really haywire and are at a very high level, and everything in the body is activated. So you get lung failure, heart failure, kidney failure, patient has strokes, body problems, etc. That's the problem.
I see, because, and as I understand it, part of what the patients are fighting, they're fighting their own immune system, basically. Correct. That is kind of overreacting to the virus. Is that a really basic way
that's Marie, that's what I tell the residents. I say, it's not the virus that kills you, it's the immune system's response to the virus that seems to be devastating and organ destructive.
Yeah, it is confounding. Doctor, we could continue to talk to you, but we're running out of time. There's so many other things happening. The list of symptoms seems to keep getting longer and longer. It's increasingly more difficult to identify whether or not you have had this because before it was just a cough and a shortness of breath, and now there are so many different symptoms. But we got to let you go, Dr. Bob. I know we'll talk to you again next week. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks, Anne-Marie.
All right, we have a lot more news to come, so stick around. You're watching CBSN, CBS News, always on.
So, I've got a question for you. What if you could watch all the CCO news you want and see all your favorite CCOers anytime, anywhere? Well, you can. Go ahead and grab your phone. Come on, I know it's close by. And go to WCCO.com or get the app and poof, there we are, right next to all those other networks you stream. Bonus time, it's free. You heard right, zip nada zilch, for free. CBSN Minnesota, built by CBS News, powered locally by WCCO.
Wherever you are, wherever you go, breaking Bay Area news, live.
This is CBSN Bay Area. I'm Michelle Griego.
CBSN Bay Area, in your hand, on demand, and absolutely free. Highly updated top local stories and weather where you live. Available everywhere. Powered by KPIX5 News. CBSN Bay Area. Always on, always free at KPIX.com.
We spoke to black officers all around the country about the challenges that they face.
When you're not in uniform, are you ever concerned for your safety?
Out of uniform, I'm just another guy. I'm a black man first.
CBSN Pittsburgh, your neighborhood news, streaming 24/7. Anytime, anywhere. Find it on KDKA.com and on all your favorite devices.
Coronavirus cases are surging in Africa, sparking growing concerns from public health experts. The continent has now reached more than 830,000 cases and 14,000 deaths. Last week, Dr. Mike Ryan, who leads the World Health Organization's emergencies program, warned that the continent was beginning to see indications of an